Good Monday morning, torchbearers, and welcome into AETC Commander's Call. I'm Dan Hawkins from the 1st Command Public Affairs Team. Delighted to be joined today by the Commander, Lieutenant General Brad Webb, and our Chief, our Command Chief, actually, Chief Master Sgt. Erik Thompson. And sir, Chief, how are you?
Good. Thanks, Dan. Thanks for hosting again.
Anytime, anytime. And just before we get started, just wanted to let everybody know if you have a question or a comment for the General or for Chief Thompson, please make sure that you drop them in the comments. We're going to get to as many of those questions as we can, and we have a full slate to talk about today. And sir, I kind of wanted to start out with this calendar year of 2020. It has been a year for sure, with a host of challenges, the global pandemic notwithstanding. But what has been maybe one of your major takeaways here from 2020?
Yeah, thanks, Dan. I think, first of all, let me just say we're doing this Commander's Call in a Facebook Live format. We did the last Commander's Call we did was this summer. We did it in a Zoom fashion. Honestly, I was a little reluctant to do the Commander's Calls that way. Obviously, I've only ever done them in auditoriums like Fleener or what have you. And I was actually very pleasantly surprised by the interaction that we had in Zoom. We've done, as you know, some of the folks will know from watching the various events, we've done a series of Facebook Lives, ever since I got in the seat here. This is probably the 4th or 5th one. And this version is Facebook Live. The whole point is to hopefully have a good and interactive event. So I appreciate you all tuning in to the various social media formats that we have. As we get going, of course, in the summer, we've had a new addition to the command team. Chief Julie Gudgel is in retirement, and now Chief Erik Thompson from the 19th Air Force is now Command Chief. So very first, I want to welcome you, Chief, to the team. And anything you'd like to say?
Hey, thanks, General. It's been 100 days so far that I've been up here on the AETC staff. It's been an amazing time, and I appreciate your leadership and the opportunity to be a part of this great team.
Thanks, Chief. Welcome aboard.
Yes, sir.
So, Dan, to the question, I think the message to our team is obviously the last, what's it been now, 8 months or what have you, have really been centered on two things that, of course, won't be news to anyone, and that is COVID and AETC's adjustment to that, and also diversity and inclusive challenges that is really the bellwether for the United States Air Force. And really, I'll just address COVID right now, and we can kind of take where you want to take the conversation. But I would tell you that we kind of adopted as a mantra early on. I mean, in the early days of AETC, inside AETC, of fighting through, and fighting through remains really kind of the calling card for us. Obviously, COVID's not over. In fact, in many areas of the country, and certainly inside AETC, we're on another one of those upswings. But the point was early on. I remember I think it was March 13th, Friday the 13th, that we got the shelter-in-place order, and there was a debate all weekend at the highest levels of the Air Force. With the chief at the time, General Goldfein, and General Wilson, the vice chief. Multiple phone calls on how are we going to orient towards this. And I think that, while we didn't articulate that this is a named operation, we're in a contingency, that's how we behaved. And I think that served us very well. Now, obviously, having had the experience of the Wuhan province American citizens that we had at Lackland, followed by the Crown Princess cruise liner experience, that oriented us well. But we went into ROM procedures across BMT and really across all of AETC, whether it was pilot training, technical training, Air University, or what have you, with that same mindset. I won't rehash the history other than to say AETC and the Air Force has led the Department of Defense on this orientation. You can see it from the number of visitors that we've had from the Secretary of Defense, undersecretaries of the Air Force, both chiefs, the Secretary of the Air Force, et cetera, saying, hey, what have you guys done? Because you're really a step ahead. We had last month our meeting of the MAGCOM commanders. It's called a Corona, not to be confused with COVID, but both chiefs, the Chief of Staff of the Air Force, General Brown, and the Chief of Space Operations, General Raymond, both took times out of their opening comments to address AETC specifically and AETC's efforts, both from General Brown's perspective, respective of COVID and DNI, and from General Raymond, how we have really carried a good load for the Space Force in their stand-up. There was so much talk about AETC that at some point it was almost a little embarrassing. And I wish our folks inside AETC could have heard that. But suffice to say, I'm very, very proud of the efforts that we've had in the areas of COVID and DNI both.
And I've heard you say it before, but there were really generational consequences if our team here at AETC doesn't fight through COVID-19. Yeah,
well, the charts that A1 has at the air staff level can show you that if we were to stop production, which of course was one of the options, and I mean that production across the board, education, flying training, et cetera, the readiness of the United States Air Force drops off a cliff, especially so because we haven't done stop loss or any of those other methodologies. It was really important that we orient towards how are we going to fight through this. General Golfing used the phrase, it's not business as usual, but business as required. And that's what we've been doing. And that's what we continue to do to this day.
And also really required our Air Force recruiting service to do a wonderful job on the front end, because they had to do a lot of work to make it happen there too.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And the cutting edge efforts that recruiting service did to be able to sustain what they called agile recruiting, and be able to, with MEPs that were shutting down and reopening as COVID as a brush fire went across the various areas of the country, have been game changing, because we're allowed to, or it allowed us to continue to keep that flow in. And then the methodologies that they're using joins a long list of things that I've been compiling, that I call the things we'll never go back to, ways that we'll never return to, because we've used this COVID challenge as an accelerant, really, for change in a lot of areas. That why are we still doing this pen and pencil kind of approach, or what have you? And recruiting service in particular has done really remarkable along that front.
And to kind of keep that theme too, in basic military training, they did a lot to keep that initial pipeline going, to include dropping down to 7.5 weeks, but they also had Tent City built up as swing space in case they needed it, and then also something really groundbreaking for us, or something we haven't done in a long time, we stood up BMT at a secondary location in Keesler.
Yep. And of course, we've just announced that Keesler will put back in warm base status, I guess is the right terminology. We can go back to it. The logistics are challenging. We're only putting 60. I mean, that's not insignificant, believe me, but 60 trainees a week out there, and I think we'll graduate the last class at Keesler, at least for now, here real shortly. But that was an overwhelming success. The Tent City was as well, because it allowed us to get physically distanced, which of course was a charge when you go into ROM to how are you going to do this. And a side benefit is to allow us to do some maintenance on dorms and dining facilities, et cetera, that we just hadn't had the ability to do because it's being used to 100% maximum. The Tent City has come down as well. But all that stuff is, we can tap into it again if we need to. But it's this mindset that we're talking about. This agile mind on, okay, we're not, we don't know what the answer is. It was one of the things that I got asked a lot on, what do you want us to do? I don't know. I've never been a squadron commander in a pandemic environment, but here's the intent. The intent is we got to train. The readiness of the United States Air Force, it starts here, but it's dependent on here. So we just got to figure it out. And those are two, very visible, but two really good examples of AETC figuring it out.
Another great example is kind of that we always joke about superpowers uniting, but 2nd Air Force and 19th helping each other out. 19th Air Force was able to help 2nd Air Force with student flow and moving students together to minimize risk, and something, of course, Chief, that you saw at 19th Air Force. But what an amazing job by our airmen all across AETC.
I'll tell you, it couldn't be more incredible to be a part of this team and watch as they really stepped up when the Air Force needed it, right? And it's not just the wings, it's not just the NAS, it's the staff as well, doing all the synchronization and coordination to make all of this happen in a fairly smooth manner, to the point that, as the General said, we had leaders coming in from across the Department of Defense to understand how we were continuing to be so successful while minimizing risk to our airmen and risk to our families.
And you said it all along, it's risk to mission, risk to force, and balancing that as a commander requires a lot of hard decisions, but I feel confident to say at this point in the game, we've done a really good job here across the board, leadership on down.
Yeah, I think what we find is when you hear leaders talk all the time about empowerment and the importance of that in not only job satisfaction, but at the end of the day, the quality of the job that gets done. I have heard innumerable examples of, in a lot of these visits from the Secretary of the Air Force, Secretary of Defense, et cetera, of them asking how it was to squadron commanders or to the flight commanders or MTI leaders. And their responses have been, what an awesome time to be a leader in AETC. We understand the commander's intent. No one's ever done this before, so we're paving our own path, and we're moving out. That's, when people enjoy what they're doing, people feel empowered. They don't understand they have the responsibility, but they also have the authority to move out. I credit that in a big way with the success that we've had to date. Again, I'm not declaring victory. We're far from through this. We have challenges going on even right now. With breakouts that occur, but we're meeting it head on, and we're continuing to get the mission done.
And so, when you look at COVID-19 and what a huge challenge it continues to be to this day, if we backdate just a little bit and go back to May and the George Floyd incident in Minneapolis, and the feelings that stirred across our country and really forced us as an Air Force to look at ourselves internally with the need to create safe space and have difficult conversations. You decided early on that you wanted to really address this, and it goes back to our Air Force core values and the C for our AETC priorities, which you told me on the very first day that I met you, sir, down in the visiting officers' quarters when you hadn't even moved in here yet, that diversity, inclusion, our core values, those were going to be part of your charge for AETC.
Yeah.
What about this whole challenge has really resonated with you in terms of making sure that all of our airmen feel a sense of diversity and inclusion in our ranks?
Yeah. Well, you're right, Dan. I mean, obviously I'm in my second major command billet, and the challenges that we addressed inside of AFSOC it was kind of an ethics and professionalism challenge. And really the lesson that I took from that was while we, as Air Commandos, talked about what was important to us every day and the 5 soft truths and all this kind of thing, I kind of had leapfrogged the fact that all our airmen understand core values. Of course, we got that. The problem was I wasn't articulating that every day. And we saw some of the results of that. It wasn't catastrophic, but was it a little bit of a slippery slope? Yes. And so that's the experience that I brought into AETC, which is why when we kind of slapped the table on the mission vision priorities for Air Education Training Command, the C being cultivating an environment of excellence, listen, as the first command, if we're not articulating this, if we're not focused on that, how can we expect that the rest of the Air Force will? So we did take that stance. The events of late May, which kind of on top of each other, was the George Floyd incident, but also the Protect Our Defenders report, which pointed out in very stark terms that the United States Air Force has a problem with racial disparity. And of course, I don't need to rehash what's happened over the summer along that lines. And General Goldfein used to say, something broke. Something broke inside the U.S., something broke inside our Air Force. What he means by that is, and now I'm interpreting it, and really this is my feeling, this is a moment in our Air Force. And I just determined that we need to seize this moment and make good history. And that's really how I conclude every one of our real talks. Now, to be fair, General Webb was a little unsure about getting in front of a live audience on Facebook Live and doing these real talks. I mean, the whole point is, the contention is, we as an Air Force haven't talked about difficult subjects, whether it's sex, race, religion, these are things that, politics, those generally aren't discussed. And by sex, I mean sexual orientation. And so it was just kind of, I was a little reticent to get out. And I'll tell you, our first sergeant, Chief Victor, was the one that encouraged me to do this. And of course, you and I have shared, we don't know how this is going to go. We did our latest installment on Friday. I'm really encouraged that we are reaching an audience and they are hearing a message that needs to be heard. I was in the clinic this morning at Randolph doing my hearing test and ran into a master sergeant who told me that she had heard the broadcast or watched the broadcast on Friday. The first one we did, I was at the gym and ran into some airmen that said, "Hey, sir, thanks for doing this." And I mean, so there are some folks that are watching, and I feel like this has been a really good moment. The point is that it's not just me. I'm trying to do this as an example that, hey, even though this isn't safe space when you're on a live social media platform, commanders and leaders at all levels should be doing it. And they are in AETC. That is what's prompted. I mean, General Brown gave me a call to encourage us. He saw it. He watched the first one we did and was very impressed. So it is happening across AETC. It's something that I'm particularly proud of.
And Chief, and we've talked about it, but creating that safe space for difficult conversations, it's just something that all of our leaders need to ensure is happening.
Absolutely. So this is about the business of leadership. It's about readiness. It's about dignity and respect. It's about making sure our airmen have the ability to play at the top of their game and execute what our nation needs them to execute. And the boss has kind of been a pathfinder for us on this one, to allow commanders to understand that they can have these difficult conversations, that it's important for leaders at all levels to have these difficult conversations and have these engagements.
And I think it's really important to note, like, it's okay to learn. I remember on Friday night's broadcast specifically, Chief Zachary talked about mentorship and the fact that he was always told that he should have two mentors, one that looks exactly like him and then one that looks completely the opposite. And
Yeah.
Your reaction, you were like, wow, I've never heard that before.
Yep.
I mean, we all can learn something during this time.
I haven't had one of these real talk sessions yet where I haven't walked away with, never heard that before, never thought of that before, which is, I think, healthy.
So moving into some of the things that we're doing in AETC, some of the things that are happening at Air University, the scholarships for historically black colleges and universities. There's a lot happening on this front, along rated diversity front as
Yep.
well. So this is something that's not just today. This is something that's today moving forward.
No, you're right. Now, of course, these initiatives have been underway for years. There's no denial of that. But I think our command, by taking the mantle, leadership helm of some of these efforts, RDI, or Rated Diversity Initiative, is a perfect example. That was headed by the air staff for, I'm not sure how long. It was obviously predates me.
Right.
But we asked for and were given leadership helm of that earlier this year. And so we're leading that effort. And so it comes in the form of updating pilot qualification tests to be a little bit more modern, a little bit more with an inclusive eye to some of the scholarship efforts that you mentioned that we have going on. There are a number of efforts. This is going to be a long road. This isn't anything we're going to be able to put a mark on the wall and say, by January we'll slap the table and that's done. But there is concrete progress occurring every day and every week, and you just want to keep chipping away at that.
So earlier on the live stream, and before I forget, if you have a question for Chief Thompson or General Webb, please make sure that you throw it in the comments and we'll definitely get to those. But you talked about Corona and really the first time with our new Chief of Staff of the Air Force, General Brown, and he talks about accelerating change or lose.
Yep.
So what stood out to you about your time at Corona and the mission of AETC as it relates to accelerating change or lose?
Yeah, so that is the mantra, and more than that, the paper. He has a paper out that articulates that, and it comes from his experience and obviously his sight picture and his preparation for his job as chief. That given the national security strategy and the national defense strategy, which of course is always where we should start, that we have great power competitors that are equal, and if we are not, if we're allowing ourselves to get bogged down by bureaucracy, or if we just are content to sit on our laurels, we will lose, and that's the point. So he's organized his major efforts along what he calls 4 action orders. It's in a lineup that's fairly easy to remember: A, B, C, D. A is airmen, B is bureaucracy, C is competition, and D is design implementation. A, as will be no shock to anybody in AETC, airmen, is led kind of dually by the Air Staff A1 and AETC. And in fact, we briefed all 4 of these action orders, kind of first blush briefing at Corona last month. And General Kelly, BK Kelly, and I briefed airmen together. And so our lines of effort are the ones that won't be a surprise to anyone. It's about force development, developing the airmen we need, kind of wheelhouse stuff that this command's been working on for a number of years. And it dovetails beautifully with our mission, vision, priorities as well. And then bureaucracy really is going to come down to, if General Brown would tell you the most important action order that we have is A, the airmen. Where accelerate, change, or lose lives is in B. He launches his narrative on bureaucracy as I hate bureaucracy. And this will be less, I think, about organizational change than it will be about really getting to the root of who owns a particular item, who has veto power, who's an influencer, and who's a supporter. Because we've confused ourselves inside the Air Force and certainly inside big staff efforts on, hey, you may not agree, interesting but not compelling, you're not a vetoer,
right,
or you're not an owner. And so I think you're going to see a real effort on that. The other thing I would tell you that you're definitely going to hear from General Brown, kind of like you used to hear from General Goldfein, every challenge and opportunity. If you ever heard General Goldfein speak, I guarantee you heard that. I think with General Brown, you're going to hear, I want to have the meeting after the meeting in the meeting. And what he means by that is get it all out on the table right here when I'm here. I don't want to walk the halls afterwards and hear, well, what we should have talked about was, blah, blah, blah. That's the meeting after the meeting. He don't want that after the meeting. He wants it in the meeting. So I think he's deadly serious, General Brown is, about really cutting through, making hard decisions, because that's what it's going to take to accelerate change. C is all about competition. I think, we've hit that on a number of forums, great power competition, China and Russia, the air staff has kind of oriented themselves to really get after the nuts and bolts of the national security strategy along that lines. And design implementation, really, it's about how do we go about executing and acquiring major weapon systems in the future, and the importance of the digital environment, digital literacy, and the digital Air Force. And in fact, the Vice Chief even says this coming year will be the year of the digital Air Force. The ability to take data and to use, whether it's machine learning, artificial intelligence, virtual reality, some blend of all that, and design weapon systems. In our case, how we move into learning, we've already got to step up on that. But that's what really what the D means, and that's how he's oriented us on in the ABCDs of accelerate, change, or lose.
And I just wanted to shout out a couple people who are commenting on the feed. Katie Braun's listening from Portland, Oregon today, and she's saying, thanks again for the Trailblazer conference room naming and ceremony. She said that was a great diversity statement.
Yeah.
So thank you, Katie, for tuning in. John Herman says, very pleased that we continue to focus on this critical issue. Denise, kind of the same vein. This is a critical topic of which we cannot lose sight. So I wanted to make sure that we got in those comments from when we had the diversity conversation.
Yeah, the Trailblazer conference room was a long time in coming. I'm particularly happy. That's another example of kind of fighting through COVID there, because we wanted to do that, and we're kind of like, hey, we may not be able to pull this off. We were going to do it on the Women's History Month and in March, but we went ahead and fought through that. We had almost every one of the class of 78 there, Trailblazers, was able to attend. And I think it's really important. One of the aspects that you hear about every single engagement with diversity and inclusion is folks have to be able to see themselves in the role. If you expect them to, they want to be an astronaut one day, they want to be a pilot one day, or they want to be, President of the United States one day. It's kind of important to be able to see yourself, and I think that's what we've done with the Trailblazer.
So, getting back to the Corona conversation, our strategic action plan in AETC, you've said all along, it's kind of a living, breathing document that kind of shifts to where we need it to shift. And obviously with COVID-19 changing the equation a little bit, we've recently updated our strategic action plan. You recently unveiled the changes, and the AETC part of our priorities aren't going to change.
Yep. Yeah, so, as General Brown has unveiled his Accelerate, Change, or Lose, and the ABCDs of that, really our alignment under our priorities of A, E, T, and C fit beautifully in there. I've contended since we first rolled out our first strategic action plan, if you will, back in about this time last year. Maybe it was in October, something like that. I contended at that time that about every 6 months we're going to have to update that. Just world events, or just changes in our Air Force will have us to relook it. Now, I can tell you this: the A, the E, the T, and the C will not change in my time at the helm here. I mean, I think from an advanced force development, enhanced lethality and readiness, transforming the way we learn, cultivating an environment of excellence, that's sound. It's stood through several secretaries of the Air Force already, and also now our second Chief of Staff of the Air Force. Now the sub bullets or the sub priorities in there, they will evolve, and so we have tweaked them, and I would think tweak is really kind of appropriate, and it's with an orientation on the two things that we've just kind of spent a lot of time talking about. An orientation of being in a contingency environment with respect to COVID has caused some changes along that line, and also the diversity and inclusion quotient.
And so, and not that we'll spend a ton of time, but I just really wanted to roll through it. So advanced force development now is focused on developing the airmen we need and refining the systems that support them. what exactly does that mean?
Yeah, so back in December last year was when we went through the Chief's strategic planning choices is what the meeting's called. He articulated at that time that the 2022 POM build, which is the programmatic build for the Air Force, will be focused on airmen. And I turned around to General Sears, who at the time was our A58, and said, lock that in. And that evolved over the next series of months into what we know today as developing the airmen we need. We use that inside of AETC, but it isn't just AETC at this point. The Air Force is using that. And it is wheelhouse stuff for our A36, obviously, but contributory to all the other directorates as well in the force development realm. So all the efforts that we have underway inside our force development, as the AETC commander, of course I wear a second hat as the force development commander, fall in that job jar, if you will. The AETC commander has been dual-hatted now for, I think, probably almost 2.5 years, I think is what it is. And we're really starting to put meat on the bones of what we want to do that is really oriented towards the Chief's priorities. So we have a summit coming up that we'll be able to kind of lock some more stuff in. But we're not kind of waiting around to ask. I think we got a really good sense of what the Chief's intent is, and we're moving out. We've already had some huge successes along this line. The rewrite of the pilot test is one example. Another one that we're already executing is in the exception to policy medical accessions. We have made great strides. That is all now under AETC to run on the Vice Chief's behalf. Those are just a couple of real quick examples.
And again, recruiting kind of falls in that systems that support developing the airmen we need, and they did a wonderful job in this pandemic reaching their goal.
Absolutely. And from a total force perspective as well.
Yes, they've done a wonderful job on that front as well. And Chief, inside the A as well, I kind of wanted to talk about valuing force generators. I know when I sat down with you when you first got in the seat 100 days ago or so, you said this is one of my top priorities. But getting after the issues that impact our force generators is definitely high on your to-do list.
Oh, it's huge. Not only because it's one of the boss's priorities, but it's a spot where I think I can make a difference. It's a spot that I think I can get in there and really kind of put some effort in there. As we talk about how do we recruit the best talent, right? How do we onboard them appropriately so that they can execute the AETC mission, which is critically important to the United States Air Force? How do we continue to develop them as leaders while we have them in Air Education and Training Command? And then once they've done this awesome work for Air Education and Training Command, how do we prepare them to go back into their parent MAGCOM or their parent AFSC where they came to us from? That's really a critical part of valuing force generation. AETC should be an assignment of choice. It should be a high quality of service, a high quality of life. We need to do the things that we need to do to make that a reality for our airmen.
And you guys got a wonderful opportunity over the last couple of weeks with airmen at a few different units that some you did virtually, a couple you got to do in person, but you actually got to hand out some stripes to some of our force generators.
We did. So the commander has the opportunity, obviously, to step promote some of our exceptional performers. And in addition to those step promotions, there were also a couple of commissioning packages that went out through the Senior Leader Enlisted Commissioning Program, both SLEC P and SLEP A, two different programs. But in both of those instances, some of those individuals were force generators, and that's a great success story for our command.
So the E talks about that disrupted ops in this contested environment of COVID-19, if you will, but also resourcing decisions. And so obviously, the tweak really kind of driven by COVID-19 a little bit, but it goes deeper than that.
Yep. And the thing to remember about these priorities is there's bleed over. I mean, you could have an argument about, hey, that should really be in T, or that should be in A, or this should be, and all that's true. So it's really about bucketizing efforts so that we can, so that the leaders that I've charged to move out with this can have the bandwidth to deal with them. And I think we've done a pretty good job of that. You'll notice in this the new layout. By the way, it's on all our computer splash pages right now, the tweaks. They don't lock, A36 doesn't own, for instance, A, lock, stock, and barrel. In this instance, the A58 doesn't own the E, lock, stock, and barrel. But there's kind of a majority of the effort. So the E still kind of acknowledges straight up the importance of the programming. We have a number of programs, T7, obviously, which we'll be onboarding before long, but also sustainment of a number of weapon systems that we already have that occupy a lot of time. But the COVID efforts, it's just the experience of the last 8 months and the things that we've just spent a lot of time talking about, obviously is a strategic priority for this command. So we just need to call it such. And there's still a lot of work that goes on behind the scenes every week as we continue to fight through and continue with production that occurs. And we just need to acknowledge that up front. So that's the major tweaks from the E.
And we got a question as it relates to the E. John Herman wants to know what specific successes or failures have been documented during increased telework use, and what permanent teleworking successes might we keep after COVID?
Yeah. I think I used the phrase earlier, things that we'll never go back to. Teleworking has opened the eyes of AETC, to be sure. But it isn't just AETC, it's the Air Force and probably American society, frankly. In March, if somebody had said we're going to Zoom, I wouldn't have had any idea what we were talking about. I'd never heard of Zoom. I'd never heard of that app. I'm probably, not Johnny on the spot with respect to all things technology, but I'd never heard that phrase. It's kind of like in the early days of 9/11 when people were merc chatting. I'm like, never even heard of that thing. And now I don't know how we ever, conducted our operations without merc chat. Well, Zoom is and of course Zoom isn't the only one. There's obviously plenty of these types of things. But at the headquarters level, we have been operating certainly below 50% occupancy since shelter in place, and at other levels inside the Air Force and frankly the Pentagon. I've been to the Pentagon a few times since we've been under COVID. You would not recognize it. I mean, it is like it looks like you're on a Sunday night walking the halls in the middle of the work week. So I think that there are areas at headquarters levels where you're never going to see the return of full populations that we would have experienced pre-COVID. I do believe that. Now, at the wing level, kind of the closer wing and below, the closer you get to where the rubber meets the road, I don't know. I mean, I think presence is obviously going to be really important to do the job we do. Maybe have a little bit less of an effect, but teleworking is this is an example of this challenge, and it serves as an accelerant to being able to do work in a teleworking, do your job in a teleworking environment that's working just fine.
I think the extension of that is that we have to give credit where credit's due to the folks that have exhibited the flexibility and the resiliency and the ability to adapt to this very new environment for us. As we first started trying to do this telework thing, some of the tools weren't really as mature as they needed to be. The network was certainly not as mature as it needed to be. And we have all come a long way on that. And the fact that we are still operating our Air Force at the same high level of precision that we always has is an absolute testament to the folks on the staff that are doing this type of telework environment. I think where it's really important that we continue to push on this is how do we maintain a very high degree of social interaction, right? Making sure that we're keeping the pulse on our force as we stay physically distant from each other and keep each other safe.
Yeah, I mean, really two excellent points embedded inside what the chief just said. First of all, we'd probably be remiss if we didn't give a shout out to 16th Air Force over on the other side of the city at Lackland that really worked very diligently to open up this bandwidth that you're talking
Absolutely.
about. The name was because the Air Force we had in January or even February, we couldn't have pulled off all the bandwidth draw on this. So that's a great example of them orienting. To the chief's second point on resilience, if I can just use it as a one-worder, it remains a concern that we need to stay on top of. people that are sheltered in place for months at a time. We already in the Air Force have challenges with respect to mental health, behavioral health kind of pieces. That certainly doesn't go away. And the interesting phenomenon was in the early months, we saw a precipitous drop-off in suicidal ideation, suicide attempts, suicides. That was kind of curious, made us scratch our head. Well, it's violence in the home, all these kind of things are. Well, it's not that those things stopped. It's that we weren't able to monitor it or see it. And so it's come back to us in a big way over the summer months. And as we go into, whether we're in the second wave of COVID or whatever we happen to be in, it needs to be at the forefront of our mind still, because it's come back with a vengeance in all those areas.
Yes, sir.
And we have a couple of questions that are similar vein, so I'll kind of wrap them into one. But knowing that COVID positive cases continue to increase in the San Antonio area, what does that mean for the headquarters staff? You kind of talked about teleworking, but does it mean anything else for the headquarters staff? I don't. You may have just answered that question.
Well, I mean, just to be clear, I think we are still fighting through. I think it is still business as required, not business as usual, and we need to do what we need to do. In other words, we may be in areas in the early days of COVID, production, if I can just use an umbrella term, dipped to probably 50%. As a whole across Air Education Training Command. By June, we were probably back up close to 100%, maybe in the 90s. We're seeing a second wave where production's being impacted. Everyone understands that. I certainly understand that. Of course, I think it's important, but we just need to orient how we need to orient to make sure that we stay safe, but that we continue to do our mission. And that's really what it means for us.
Jimmy Whitaker says, sir, the strategy is great, but at ground level, what is being done to ensure that CDC guidelines and Air Force guidelines are being adhered to? I've seen all too many times the simple individual actions of social distancing not being adhered to, wearing of masks. What can the individual airman do to fix the problem of non-compliance?
Well, do you want to take a swing at that?
Yeah, so first off, each wing commander has an incredible amount of authority and responsibility within their wings to manage, FPCon and HealthCon, HPCon conditions. We've seen them do great work over the past 8-9 months that we've been going through this. As they have individually at the wing level managed their HPCons to ensure that they're taking the appropriate amount of precautions against the risk within their community. And that's been a very different thing for each wing. At the MATCHCOM level, we have an incredible staff up here, which a team of the SG and the 1 and the 3, given the boss great advice as we monitor each wing and understand where the COVID conditions are raging or not raging, subsiding, in each particular area, and then the commanders are informing the bosses they're making these decisions. So the commanders are empowered at the wing level to make good decisions. If anything, from the comment, it sounds like we just need to continue to communicate up and down the chain that every airman's got a responsibility to ensure we're taking care of each other and keeping the force safe.
And Dominique, I won't try to pronounce the last name, but says, will families be allowed to attend BMT graduation again? I know that's kind of more of a JBSA General Miller question, but right now it's probably not prudent right now.
Well, it's definitely not prudent right now. Of course, the desire is to someday that we get back to normal. And I do think we'll get there. Probably normal isn't on the near horizon. It's probably at some point beyond vaccination, the vaccines that are coming out. We're hearing news of the trials and the success of these trials on a routine basis. Probably, the timelines I hear are the spring kind of timelines, but that begins a vaccination process, which will probably take the bulk of 2021. I don't know the answer to that, Dan, so I don't want to make up one. Someday we will be able to get back to that. I very much look forward to that. I don't think it'll be anytime soon.
And Colleen gives a shout out to all the outstanding medical teams supporting COVID operations and keeping us all safe. And we have AETC teams supporting communities as well. We have teams in El Paso right now.
Yeah. Did you want to comment? Or?
Go ahead, sir.
Listen, the medical community are the infantry of this war, if you will. They are on the front lines of this, and our medical community inside of AETC in particular, I could not be prouder. In fact, I wouldn't even be able to articulate any of the success we've had if it wasn't for instance, the 59th Medical Wing, the people at BAMC, the people at Wilford Hall, that oriented us in those very early days with assertiveness. I mean, they were out front in leading this, and they have been and the reason I say it's in the front trenches, if you go out there to Reed Clinic at Lackland, you see it. They even brief it here, and when you step across this line, you've just entered into the zone, the conflict zone, and it's a good visual, but it is a very appropriate metaphor for what's happened, and the medics are. I mean, I'm exceptionally proud of them, because we wouldn't have all these people visiting us going, what's the Air Force got right, if it hadn't been for them taking that stance.
Another question related to medical, but it's from Robert Vance. He says, is there a plan for distribution of the vaccine for military and civil service personnel?
Well, the plans are being developed. And of course, we're one of the trial locations over there at Lackland. But yes, there will be a plan. It's not unveiled yet. I mean, it's got to be this is literally a whole of government, and frankly, it's beyond government. It's a whole of nation effort on how we're going to get after the distribution of that to 330 million people, or whatever's going to have to be done.
It's going to be incredible, but.
So that looks like, at least on my screen right now, the questions for the E. So we'll transition now and go into the T, transforming the way we learn. This pretty much stayed the same, talking about aggressively and cost effectively modernizing education and training and developing and fostering our strategic relationships and partnerships. But you've seen firsthand some of the great initiatives in technology. I heard you might have even walked the plank at Shepherd.
Yes, I have. The efforts that, I guess, obviously this predates me, that really the flagship was Pilot Training Next, PTN, has begat a number of other Next, which is really Learning Next. It's really updating the mentality of 1970s learning with the fundamentals that need to be done as we advance deep into the 21st century with how we ought to be learning. And it's taking place now at any nook and cranny inside AETC. So you mentioned the tech school kind of experience. As I've gone out and about and visited, of course I had the CE. I mean, it's kind of fundamental, but if you're going to be a civil engineer, being afraid of heights and being a civil engineer is not very compatible. So we put on the VR goggles, and even though I knew I was standing in the middle of a classroom, I had to walk a plank to go pick up a wrench and return. And of course, the breezes, you can see trees blowing, and right about the time you reach over for the wrench, you get a kind of surprise. I won't give away the whole thing, but you can get a little bit of a surprise there that you need to react to. This is a helicopter pilot that's used to flying, a couple hundred feet and below, and I'm not sure I would have passed that civil engineering height test. And it plays out in areas like intelligence, where you see a flipped classroom with airmen that are, just spanking brand new from all areas of the nation. The classroom I visited, there was an inner city Chicago airman, somebody from rural Oklahoma, a couple from Georgia. Anyway, didn't know each other. Obviously, they're teaching themselves to be fusion analysts. And that's fusion of all types of intel, not nuclear scientists, which I think some of them, including me, thought that's what they were studying. But they were weeks ahead of their contemporaries. And in fact, all their contemporaries in the other classrooms are peeking over the the divider going, how do we get us some of that? And it really does stick with you that we're onto something. It's one of the reasons we have the commander of ACC on base today at JBSA to look at the kind of efforts that are going on. I mean, the Air Force recognizes AETC's onto it. It kind of goes back to my initial points that our Air Force leadership holds AETC in very high esteem for a lot of that's happening. We are operationalizing the vision that was laid out a few years ago.
And one of the questions we had was, how does AETC keep up with the pace of new technology and training? And I think that kind of gets after some of that bureaucracy you talked about and design implementation and those action orders that General Brown has. But part of it is also how we do business here in AETC. Yeah,
I think at the action level, and I kind of say it that way because we could be talking about headquarters, we could be talking about units. But at the action level, the chief and I want us to be innovative, to be assertive, to be change agents, to accelerate change. And so our job at the leadership level is to ensure that we remove those obstacles that are keeping us from making progress down the road. So that kind of stuff needs to be elevated. It's back to General Brown's bureaucracy and knocking that stuff out of the way, kind of championing where we need to champion at a 3-star action officer level or at a command chief level to get that stuff out of the way so we can go forward. It is beyond clear that at the action level inside of AETC, we know what right is, and then we just need to facilitate that happening.
Another question or comment/question, what are some of the ways we as a command are being cost effective with modernization? More specifically, how are we tracking the many efforts of modernization that bases are getting after and cross-telling those efforts?
Yeah, so that is challenging because when you empower folks to get out, they are. But there's only so much funds to go around. Some of it's duplicative. Some of it doesn't talk to it because of proprietary software or what have you, isn't compatible with each other. And those are areas that are rife for us to go, hey, listen, all these different comm systems, they're great, but we got to make sure they're compatible. It's easy to say, much harder to do. And we see it in some of our areas that we really, that are frankly part of our strategic priorities to align to get after that.
Yeah, there's this awesome spark of creativity, innovation, and determination, really, that General Webb and I have seen across the command at this point. And it's amazing to see it every single wing, every single tech school, every pilot training base, you name it. Everybody is working towards this common goal of transforming training and making it not just faster training or cheaper training, but better training, right? How do we create a world-class airman that's ready to go work for a combatant commander? The hard part, as General Webb said, is how do we make sure we're not shooting on each other's targets? How do we make sure we're not spending money on duplicative efforts? And then more importantly, how do we synchronize this at the MAJCOM level to really elevate this game so that the entire command can derive some of the benefits of this greatness happening at the wing level?
And one of the ways, too, that we're working this transformation of learning is by partnerships. And we have done probably leaps and bounds in terms of partnerships over the last year and a half compared to the time frame before. One of them I can pick about is the Microsoft tablets at BMT, and that beta test as part of a cooperative research and development agreement. But we have several of those types of arrangements that are either in progress or on the horizon.
Yeah, and partnerships is certainly industry partnerships, no doubt about that. But it's international partnerships. It's congressional partnerships. It's other MAJCOM partnerships. It's runs the whole gamut. So that while it's a kind of a one-liner on the importance of strategic relationships and partnerships, it's a pretty healthy look at the kind of areas that are really important to AETC being able to achieve its successes.
And you've said it before, but you were amazed when you took over as commander. You had no idea that the international partnership aspect of AETC was so broad.
No, I mean, I obviously knew that we had some international relationships, but it is extensive. way more extensive than I gave it credit for. So, my tip of the hat to George Gagnon and his bunch who helped. I mean, obviously it's not him or his team alone, but they kind of, champion those efforts for us. But it's throughout the MAJCOM.
And so that leads us to our final AETC priority of cultivate an environment of excellence. We talked about it somewhat already, but driving a culture of Air Force core values, diversity and inclusion, and that's been a priority for you from day one. What makes this maybe the linchpin of the priorities?
Yeah, of course, we kind of talked about it from a core values aspect, and certainly the last 4 or 5 months, D&I has taken center stage. General Brown talks about quality of life and quality of service. Wheelhouse. The week or the day I took the flag, we were in the middle of a mold crisis. So it's all that kind of stuff. It's the hard lessons that we continue to learn with mental health challenges and these kind of things. That's all kind of wrapped up in that, and very important that we. It's just a truism that what the commander focuses on is what the command will focus on. So it has to be up front. I will say, since I didn't mention it earlier, on the core values, I do think, Air Force core values, that's a great starting point for any of that conversation. I did carry to Corona back last month the idea of looking, at least assessing whether the Air Force ought not look at a fourth core value, respect. And in fact, I briefed that at Corona. And so there was a really good discussion, for a good chunk of time. At the end of the day, I think the leadership of the Air Force is comfortable that respect is articulated in the other core values to a sufficient extent. We'll see. In other words, we're not moving out on that now, but nonetheless, critically important. I see my role inside Air Education Training Command as kind of champion that kind of stuff for airmen, and I think it was very much appreciated. Now, having said that, we did expand our competencies, our foundational competencies. Thank you. Foundational competencies to include this aspect, both respect and the digital literacy that we talked about earlier. But we're slapping the table on that now so that we can move out with our foundational competencies.
Yeah, I think if we're going to talk about torchbearer culture, what does it mean to be a torchbearer for our Air Force, a member of AETC? This is where that resides right here, is that environment of excellence that we're cultivating here. It's about taking care of each other. It's about living by our core values. It's about diversity and inclusion, in addition to the many other things like quality of service and quality of life that General Webb were talking about.
And that leads to that second focus area of caring for airmen and families, because at the end of the day, it's about both. It's about our airmen, but their families as well.
Yeah, if the strength of our Air Force is our airmen, then the strength of our airmen is their families, right? I've heard that multiple times, and it's an absolutely true statement. So we do serve as teams. This is a team sport for many, many of our airmen, and we have to make sure that we're taking care of the entire team.
So that's kind of the A.E.T.C.
Yeah.
I have a hard time saying that. I don't know
Yeah.
why I can't do the dot. But
Well, the only reason I put the dots in there is because if I say AETC, I don't want anybody confused on which aspect of AETC I'm talking about.
I tried. I did my best. So we do have a few questions, sir,
Yeah.
before we get to the closeout here. Sir, what are your thoughts on TDY travel? This question's from Caleb Washington.
It needs to be accomplished in the realm of business as required, not business as usual. There are a number of, here's a good example. I didn't travel at all for the first 3 or 4 months, maybe 5 months of being in the COVID environment. But all the MAJCOM commanders approached the chief staff of the Air Force and said, it's hard for us to it's very difficult to keep a commander's gut feel for your command. In my case, I'm responsible for 11 installations, and I don't know however many areas we have AETC presence. We're everywhere. And to do that from sitting either in my office at my home or my office at work. I mean, it's impossible to do. So we have done a few engagements to some bases that I had yet to visit in my time. And we've canceled others. In fact, this week, I was supposed to be on a trip to visit, get an update on our T7, and it's just the environment's not appropriate for us to travel. So we should, in some areas, if we assess that it is required for us to be able to do our job as a command. But in other cases, it's certainly not going to be a business as usual approach.
We'll continue to evolve in our response to this, right? So it's a conditions-based situation.
More of a comment. I don't know if there's necessarily a question in here, but it says, as a system designer for training systems, I find one of my greatest obstacles to be the extreme long lead time for acquisition and implementing new technology in terms of previously approved technology and security. I mean, it kind of talks to what we've talked about, though, in terms of getting after these kind of things.
Yeah, it's a frustration. It's a frustration for my folks, for sure. It's a frustration for me. It's a frustration for General Brown. When he talks about bureaucracy, and his leadoff phrase, "I hate bureaucracy," this is what he's talking about. I just would encourage us, we got to keep at it. Keep chipping away at it. It's just going to have to be incremental progress that we can foundationally change what we know intuitively needs to be changed.
So, as we get ready to wrap up, and we'll wait and see if we have any last minute questions pop up, but 2020, it's been a challenging year, but hard to believe Thanksgiving is like next week, and Christmas right after that. That's crazy, right?
Tell you what, it has been a trying year, but this command has stepped up to the plate, right, in the ninth inning, and use whatever analogy you want to use, but it has absolutely swung for the fences and done a great job adapting. Now, we're also not done. We still have a month and a half left to go in this year. We still have plenty of work that has to be done, and this is a time when we've got to make sure that we're keeping contact with each other, we are staying connected with each other, and we're ensuring that everybody's still safe as we go through the year.
Yeah, there's a lot of memes that you see on social media that show 2020, right. and I'm a little concerned that we get into a mindset of 2021. 2020 is behind us.
It's going to be great.
And of course, that's probably not obviously that's not going to be reality. Nonetheless, I would encourage us to stay connected, as the chief just said. Holiday season. From basically this point through and immediately after, as people that are alone or not as interactive as they would like to be, get through the holidays, but you get in that funk post. I mean, we see the mental health challenges just skyrocket. So we need to be good stewards. We need to be good wingmen for all of our folks. And at the end of the day, though, AETC, because of our orientation, has led the effort, as I've said many times, in so many areas for our Air Force, in particular, this COVID fighting through mentality, and then our D&I approach. And it is recognized. It is recognized certainly within our Air Force, but also within our Department of Defense. So we need to take a pause as we go into a kind of a Thanksgiving season and in that the festivities around that. And just kind of acknowledge that. I mean, the folks are very thankful that we have kind of carried the torch. It's the reason we have a torch on our patch. I'm really proud of all our torch bearers and their efforts, and I wish you the best as we go into the holiday season. And thanks for giving it your all. Well,
there was one final question, if you're game, sir.
Yeah.
But the question was, keeping the action orders in mind and everything that's happening, what's your expectation for leadership throughout the command moving into 2021?
Yeah, I think the mission and vision priorities and the A.E.T.C. that's on the screen will serve us well. We are absolutely aligned with General Brown's ABCDs of accelerating change. So as long as we're operating inside that construct, it's going to serve us absolutely in the right stead.
Chief, any final comments as we get ready to sign off?
Couldn't be more excited to be a part of this command and part of this great team, and look forward to spending some more time with each and every one of the folks in this command as we go forward.
Sir?
Same to me. Proud to be sitting in the seat here at AETC.
Well, that's going to wrap up AETC Commander's Call for our JBS APA team, who did a great job over these last couple of days bringing you all the pictures. I'm Dan Hawkins. So long. Happy holidays.